When we're talking about longevity, we're not just talking about adding years to your life. We're really talking about adding life to those years. Closing that gap between lifespan and health span, it's compressing the period of decline into as short of a window as possible. Ideally, just the very, very last few days, right? The technical term is compression of morbidity. The human version is this. We want you skiing at 75 if that's what you want, playing with your grandkids at 80, living independently at 85, and then when the end comes, it comes quickly.
Sometimes you don't get to play the long game cleanly. And this happened to me 10 years ago. I was diagnosed with a rare blood cancer. I didn't plan for it. I didn't cause it. I didn't miss a supplement or fail a protocol. I ate pretty much correctly, worked out, and it still happened. And suddenly the long game wasn't theoretical anymore. It was personal. I live with this blood cancer. I also have an autoimmune disease, but my diagnosis is not my destiny.
Welcome to MD Longevity Lab, where we're playing the long game. This is a podcast where science meets real life with expert insights, practical tips, and real-world tools to not only live longer, but live better. Our aim is to radically change the way medicine is practiced and enable individuals to age gracefully, maintaining health span and vitality well into their later years. We're your hosts, Dr. Nisha and Dr. Vikas Patel, physicians, partners in life, and parents balancing work, wellness, and everything in between. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the MD Longevity Lab podcast where we are playing the long game. I'm Vikas, and I'm joined by my beautiful co-host and wife, Nisha. We are filming this right around the holidays, and they wish everyone happy holidays and a happy new year. This should be airing right after the new year, and it's been a little bit of a hectic couple weeks for us with the kids at home.
For us, because you've done so much.
I mean, I supervised.
You taste tested, you supervised. I think, did you even wrap one present?
One.
Thanks.
Someone also has to fall asleep on the couch, right? Like,
yeah, you're doing those.
Someone has to use the couch.
Right. Anyway, well, by the time you guys are hearing this, it's January right now, which means somewhere right now, one of you is white-knuckling their way through a kale smoothie that you hate, convincing yourself that this year is going to be your year for change. And look, we get it. There's something completely intoxicating about January 1st, right? It's a clean slate. Everyone's got their New Year's resolutions. It's a fresh start. The gym is packed with newbies. The fridge is full of vegetables. And the motivation is immaculate.
Yeah, but here's what the data says about that motivation. By January 19th, that's just 19 days in, most resolutions are already abandoned. There's actually a name for it. It's called Quitter's Day, and researchers track it. It's a real thing. 80% of New Year's resolutions have completely failed by February 1st. That's a lot, right? 80%. If you've ever kind of fallen off the wagon by Valentine's Day and thought something was wrong with you, well, no, you're statistically normal. Congrats. That's kind of what most of us do, right? This isn't really a problem of willpower. The problem is the model that we're using. Every January, the wellness industry sells you the same kind of story. There's urgency. Let's reset your metabolism, reverse aging. Let's transform you in the next 30 days, hack your biology. It's a compelling pitch, but it's also pretty much a setup for failure because having that intensity without proper direction doesn't really last. The sprints don't work when you're really trying to run a marathon. The other thing I think that nobody really tells you is that your body doesn't really care what day it is on the calendar. Biology doesn't really reset on January 1st, and it doesn't know that it's the new year. It only knows signals and patterns that are repeated steadily over months, years, and decades.
Yeah. So we wanted to do this episode to kind of emphasize this isn't something you can fix in 30 days. We always talk about playing the long game. So we wanted this episode to be really encompassing and a zoomed out view of what playing the long game is. It's about what you're building for the next 30 years, right? Not the next 30 days. We're not here to sell you a quick fix. And honestly, these quick fixes are kind of bad for our business model. We want you all around for decades like us. And that's why we call this approach playing the long game.
It starts really with a question that I don't think we hear that often in medicine, right? Like, what do you want your life to look like when you're 85? Which is very different than how much do you want to weigh on the scale? What do you want your cholesterol to be? What's your A1C going to be? This is not about any of those things. This is about your actual life. And, you know, when you're 85 or 90, what do you actually want to be doing? Do you want to be traveling? Do you want to be able to get up off the floor, if you happen to stumble and fall? Do you want to be able to recognize your grandchildren, play with them? Do you want to be able to live independently? More than that, like, what else do you want to do for recreation? Do you want to be able to go hiking? Do you want to be able to ski? Do you want to be able to play tennis? I think most people haven't really been asked that question. Certainly when they go to the doctor's office, I don't think that that's really the way our current system is really designed. And because they aren't asked that, they aren't planning for that. So I think optimizing for the wrong finish line is, or even worse, like no finish line. It's just this endless cycle of what your New Year's resolution is every single year. And that's really not the way to do this.
Yeah. So if you guys are listening to this in January or February, or for that matter, any time of year, and you're already feeling that familiar pull of giving up, don't. But also don't double down on that 30-day detox because it's miserable, right? Instead, stay with us because what we're going to talk about today might actually change how you think about health for the rest of your life. Not because it has to be harder, it just needs to be smarter. And honestly, it's more forgiving when you're playing the long game. The long game has room for wine, pasta in Italy, skipping the gym when life gets crazy. Life just doesn't have room for decades of neglect disguised as a New Year's resolution. That is not playing the long game.
I think you're right. So this is what we're going to cover today. First, we're going to break down the differences between lifespan and health span, and why that gap is really the most important number that no one's really tracking in American healthcare. Then we're going to talk about reverse engineering, how to work backwards from that 85-year-old self to figure out what you really should be doing today.
And then we're going to explain why the long game is not about deprivation, because if your health plan requires suffering, it's already failed because you're not going to stick with it. We'll make the case that health is the new status symbol. Forget the watch or the fancy car. I'm going to tell you to forget the fancy car. I know. Because,
see my t-shirt?
Yeah. For those of you that know him, he's obsessed with cars. I call it his second wife.
For those of you who are not watching this, I have a old Ferrari Testarossa t-shirt on right now.
I think my brother had a poster of a Ferrari Testarossa in his bedroom in the 80s. Anyway, being fit at 50 is the real flex.
We're going to share stories from patients who taught us what this really looks like, both when it works and when it doesn't. We're going to try and dig into why all the quick fixes, fail, and why your body is basically a skeptical investor who really just doesn't trust the 30-day promise.
And finally, we're going to get a little personal. I'll share how my own personal cancer diagnosis changed everything about how I think about the long game and why building resilience isn't optional when life throws you a curveball. So anyone that's listening that already has a diagnosis or some health condition, this episode's also for you.
It's a lot, but I think the conversation is worthwhile, and we really wish that more people were having it.
All right, so let's play the long game and get into it. Why don't we cover first the difference between health span and lifespan? These two terms get thrown around a lot, and we'll use these throughout the episode, and we use them a lot while we're seeing patients because they're the foundation of everything that we do at MD Longevity Lab. Lifespan is pretty simple. It's how long you live, right? You're either living or you're dead. That's the number of years from birth to death. Health span is different. It's how well you are going to live for how long. It's the years you spend healthy, functional, independent, and cognitively sharp, out of doctor's appointments, not in and out of the hospital, not in a nursing home. And here's the problem. For most people, there's a huge gap.
Think of it this way. The average American lives until about 78 years of age. But the average American also spends the last 12 to 15 years of their life in decline, managing some form of chronic disease, whether it is heart failure, diabetes, heart disease, dementia, frailty, fractures from falls. So I think really people need to let that sink in, that if your health is declining anywhere from 12 to 15 years before you actually die, that's almost 20% of your life that is spent declining. And that's the average, right? That's a period of time where you are consciously aware that you're not able to do the things that you used to do, and you're suffering from a loss of quality of life. I don't really think of that as true living. I think of that as surviving. And realistically, it's just kind of like a medical holding pattern.
Yeah. And here's a stat that should terrify everyone. A 65-year-old today has about a 70% chance of needing long-term care at some point. That's crazy. 70%. So that's the majority of Americans. The average stay in a nursing home facility is over 2 years. And leading up to that, it's much more. So it's not just a 2-year decline. The average cost, well over 6 figures. And this isn't about pessimism. This is the default trajectory if we don't intervene now.
When we're talking about longevity, we're not just talking about adding years to your life. We're really talking about adding life to those years. Closing that gap between lifespan and health span, really, it's compressing the period of decline into as short of a window as possible. Ideally, just the very, very last few days, right? The technical term is compression of morbidity. But the human version is this. We want you skiing at 75 if that's what you want, playing with your grandkids at 80, living independently at 85. And then when the end comes, it comes quickly, not after a decade of slow deterioration. Here's some of the good news that's buried in those grim statistics that we were sharing. The research really suggests that up to 80% of your health span is really just determined by lifestyle factors. It's not related to genetics. I think we hear very frequently from patients that, oh, diabetes runs in the family, cancer runs in the family, heart disease runs in the family. And when people are saying that out loud, they're already just acknowledging that this is what's happening to me. And I'm mentally preparing for the decline associated with it. And they automatically have this thing go off in their head that says, well, I don't want to live a long time because long time means disability. So your genes kind of load the gun, but it's our habits that really pull the trigger or don't. That's the concept of epigenetics, right? Whether the negative genes, the genes that are not super adaptive for us, whether those actually get activated or not, that has everything to do with environmental cue and how we are treating our bodies. So that's really the goal. If we're treating our bodies correctly, then we are playing the long game.
All right, so let's get into how we actually play the long game. And we start by reverse engineering it. Instead of asking, what should I do right now? We should ask ourselves, what will my future self require? And I think that's a question we didn't start thinking about. I think many of us think with our New Year's resolutions, oh, I want this number on the scale, or I want to be down to 125 pounds. Is that number on the scale going to have anything to do with how well you live 30 years from now? Absolutely not.
I think this is also the power or problem of youth, right? Like it's impossible until you've been on the planet long enough to really recognize what your future self may want, and what your future self will value. So I think once you get into middle age and you start really having some sort of impact to your health, either because you know close people, your parents, yourself, that's when you really start to make this transition into what playing the long game might really mean. So if you want to be independent at 85, what does that really demand of your body? It's really important to be specific about this because this is kind of where it gets real. You need to be able to get up out of a chair without using your hands. That requires leg strength, specifically the ability to do things like single leg squats from a seated position. You need to be able to catch yourself if you trip. That requires balance and reaction time. It requires those type 2 fast muscle twitch fibers to not have deteriorated so much so that you can make the quick adjustment to prevent yourself from falling. You're going to need to carry your groceries, climb up stairs, recover from illnesses like the flu or a urinary tract infection. All of that stuff requires muscle mass. It requires cardiorespiratory reserve. It requires a good VO2 max.
And here's a number that should reframe how you think about fitness. A study in JAMA found that low muscle mass in older adults is associated with a 63% higher risk of death. Not a 10% bump, 63%. So muscle isn't about vanity. That's a nice little side effect, though. You look better. Muscle is truly about survival.
Here's another inconvenient truth. Really, the body that you have at age 85 is largely determined by what you do in your 40s and 50s and 60s. If you've heard I'll say this before, that muscle is really the organ of longevity. And after 30, most of us are going to be losing somewhere between 3 and 8% of our muscle mass per decade. And it's faster if you're really sedentary and slower if you're very active. Some studies will show that up to 30% of muscle loss occurs just between the ages of 50 and 70, especially because those are ages that we tend not to train very much. So another one of those components of that inconvenient truth is that bone loss follows muscle loss. If you're not actively loading your skeletal system, then you're going to lose bone density. And this is generally why, like in conventional medicine, we start getting DEXA scans for women after the postmenopause phase because we know, one, they're losing bone density because of loss of estrogen, but they're also just going to be less active at that period of time.
But by the time people feel fragile, it's already pretty late in the game, which is why we make the argument people should be getting full body DEXA scans as early as possible in their 30s and 40s. And let's be clear, it's never too late. I think we sometimes get patients in their 70s and 80s that are like, wait, have I missed the boat on this? But it is a heck of a lot easier to put in some of that work in your 40s and 50s than wait till your 60s and 70s. But we see patients that make gains well into their 70s, right?
There's no age where you can't make gains. This is just like a savings account that compounds over time. So you can add to the savings account at any point. When are you going to net the largest gain? When you have the largest time horizon. So I would never dissuade anybody from making a change at any age. It's just the earlier you start, the larger the compound effect is. So we really need to think of this as a retirement account for our body. It's fine if you're waiting until 65 or 70 to start weight training and doing resistance, but you're going to be building less wealth at that point. And then you're kind of in the emergency savings account mode rather than a long-term planning mode. So this is really why we start every patient relationship with that question about where do they really want to be when they're 70, when they're 80, when they're 90. And once you answer that, then everything else, the labs, the scans, the protocols, they all kind of have a lot more context at that point.
Yeah. And there's another topic that let's move on to. The long game is not a punishment. I think sometimes people have this misconception that longevity is about deprivation. And this is where people misunderstand what the long game actually is. Playing the long game is not about deprivation, right? It's not about going to bed at 8 p.m. every night wearing a blue light blocking sunglasses and clutching onto your sleep tracker. We see that a lot on social media. It's not about skipping dessert forever or eating organic for every single meal. It's not about skipping the wine or cocktail with dinner if that's what you enjoy and you're out with friends. It's not about eating perfectly optimized meals that taste like cardboard, because that's not living. Avoiding that stuff is not living, and it's completely unsustainable.
I think you're right that people get the wrong idea about this, that somehow longevity is about punishing ourselves to get this gain at the end of our life. And typically punishment backfires, right? So the research really backs that up. Studies on extreme dietary restriction show that people who follow these highly restrictive diets long-term often have worse psychological outcomes. And here's a kicker: they frequently end up just regaining more weight than what they had initially lost. So if your version of health makes life smaller, fewer meals shared, fewer trips taken, fewer celebrations, you're just not going to be capable of long-term sticking to that plan. And it's going to end up not mattering the way that you would want it to.
Yeah, health span should make your life feel bigger, more rich, right? Not smaller. You should order the wine when you're with people you love. You should have the dessert when it's worth it. I know I basically scope out a dessert menu every time we go out to dinner when I'm at work. Before that, I'm kind of scoping out what my appetizer is going to be, my main course, and my dessert. Eat the pasta when you're in Italy, please. It's Italy, right? The long game is not about never indulging. It's about not indulging by default.
Side note, the second we get to a restaurant and the waiter comes, Nish like orders immediately. Like, I haven't even looked at the menu, but she's like, "You're ready to order, right?" And she'll start like ordering because she has planned out the meal, because she's scoped out the menu like 4 days in advance.
Yes, but it's also that I've worked in the service industry, and anyone that's worked in the service industry knows that it's way more efficient for a waiter to have the person ordering give it all at the same time and not do this guesswork.
No, it's because your mouth is already watering because you were not patient enough to wait until we got to the restaurant to look at the menu.
That too. I'm just telling you it's for altruistic reasons.
You're thinking of them.
Yes.
Not how quickly is that food going to be in my belly. My belly.
I'm also impatient. That's true.
Here's a kind of useful mental model. Think about a company that has really excellent financial discipline. They're not cheap. They're strategic. They definitely spend money, sometimes lavishly, but always very intentionally. Biology doesn't really care about one meal. It cares about the patterns that we're setting. So you don't become unhealthy because you went off the rails on one vacation. You become unhealthy because of decades of muscle loss, decades of poor sleep, inactivity, decades of chronic stress.
Yeah, lifting, eating protein, sleep, moving, these aren't punishments. They're your insurance policy. And those things are what allow you to live fully without being fragile. Strong enough for the curveballs that life throws us, strong enough for the celebrations, and you're actually with it enough to enjoy them.
Can we talk about something a little different, a little shift in culture? I think this is really important. For decades now, the status symbols were pretty obvious, right? Having the big house or the car that you wanted, or a watch, or the perfect vacation with photos documented on social media. But I think to some degree that's changing now. At least we see it in some of the circles that we run in, and increasingly we see it more even in the news and social media now. I think health is really becoming a new status symbol, and it isn't really money that people are cherishing. I think that's a shift in the culture, that we are recognizing that time is a real commodity, and if you're not able to enjoy your time through health, then what's the point?
Definitely. Think about it. Anyone can finance a nice car, and then you can swap it out when you get bored with it or you run it dry. Anyone can put a vacation on a credit card. Those things can be faked, right? But you cannot fake being fit at age 50. You can't lease a low resting heart rate. You can't put muscle mass on a payment plan, and you can't take a medication to mimic all this. So when you see someone in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who's visibly strong, right? Energetic, moving well, you know that is earned. That's years of discipline made visible. It's not a quick fix.
One of the things about being young and attractive, right? Like, sure, you should be at that age. That's just biology doing its job. Evolution wants you looking your best, feeling your best during your peak reproductive years. Congrats. That's, like just a functional, normal mammal. But evolution's kind of done with us by the age of 40, 45. And so, if you're still fit, if you're 55 and you're strong, if you're 65 and you're keeping up with the 40-year-olds, right? That's not biology. That's really a choice. That's the work that someone has put in to maintain their reserves. And that's really what I think deserves a medal.
Amen. That's my mantra at work. Seriously, I tell patients, like, you're cute in your 20s. Good for you. Like, that's happened before gravity's hit. You haven't pushed out any kids. Great. Call me in 20 years when things are still holding up. Then you'll get a high five from me. And my staff knows this too, because to be fit in your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, that's the real prize. After 30, everything in your corner, right? Physiology is just trying to slow down. And after 30, your muscles want to atrophy if they're not used. Your metabolism wants to drop if you're not challenging yourself. Fat wants to accumulate in your viscera. That's the default. Your joints want to stiffen. So to stay fit after 40, you have to actively fight entropy every single day. And that's not about vanity. That's defiance. And if there's one thing you knew about me when we met, it's that defiance was my middle name, or my second middle name, among others.
Austin Danger Powers.
Yeah, Danger's my middle name too.
Just look at, in culture right now, the most successful executives, entrepreneurs, investors, what do they kind of have in common? Increasingly, obviously wealth, but it's really health. You see them make this transition, like now they've worked really hard and they're recognizing what they don't have. And then they make a concerted effort. And, like you see Mark Zuckerberg is like growing out now and like becoming masculine. Jeff Bezos has a six pack.
I could probably do more pull-ups than Mark Zuckerberg.
I mean, he's kind of a weenie, but that's another story.
We're going to get shut down for this.
That's probably true. Yeah, these guys are, they're doing triathlons. They're tracking their glucose. They're lifting heavy things. They're sleeping 8 hours when they probably used to get by on 4 or 5. It's really that they've just figured out what the rest of the world is still kind of learning, that health is the ultimate competitive advantage.
Yeah, $100,000 watch doesn't give you more energy in your 4 p.m. meeting. A sports car will not help you keep up with your kids or grandkids. A vacation home doesn't prevent you from needing a hip replacement or long-term care. But being strong, being metabolically healthy and flexible, having a VO2 max in the top quartile for your age, that's wealth you can actually use in every department, every day, every moment.
And really, this is kind of the democratizing part. Unlike a Rolex, this status symbol is available to pretty much everyone. You don't have to be rich to deadlift. You don't need connections to go for a run. You don't need a trust fund to eat protein and vegetables. It really just requires showing up consistently for years. It doesn't mean that you have to knock it out of the park on January 1 with 4 hours of exercise and the perfect diet. It means incremental change over time. So there are definitely barriers, right? Time is a barrier, income disparity, but we see so many people who drive really nice cars, but are in the fast lane when it comes to decline. And this is a total mismatch in how to prioritize.
Yeah. So PSA, if you guys listening are in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, and you're putting in the work, you're lifting, you're moving. If you're prioritizing your sleep and recovery, you are not just taking care of yourself. You are building something that most people never will. That's the top 1%. And that's impressive, right? That's rare. That's the real flex. You are killing it. And for those that are listening that aren't quite on that trajectory yet, the good news is you can change it. You have agency, and most of this stuff is completely reversible, and you can get on a totally different trajectory.
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of reminds me of a patient that I think about sometimes. Early 70s, very thoughtful, engaged, cognitively totally with it, still driving herself to her appointments. But physically, she was on the fragile side. She had fallen twice in the last year, struggled to be able to get up from a chair. Her bone density was on the low side. Her muscle mass was like at the second percentile for her age. You know, she looked at me and she said, I don't understand. I've always been thin. I've eaten well. I've taken my vitamins. And really, from my standpoint, that's kind of the moment when you realize, like, this is how we in medicine have kind of culturally failed a huge subset of the population. No one ever really told her that being thin is not protective, that she also needs to be strong, that muscle isn't really a cosmetic endeavor, it's a functional endeavor, and that being independent requires having a physical presence. So she really did everything that she was told, and it still wasn't enough. And that's really because we didn't do a good job of telling her what the right things to do were. So it's, you know, one of these stats that I think is a little bit haunting, that among 65-year-olds, falls are really the largest injury-related cause of death. 1 in 4 older adults is going to fall every single year. And once you've fallen once, your risk of falling again doubles. In the ER, I see the downstream version of this constantly. And we've talked about this a little bit before, that in the first year after a fall causing a hip fracture, there's a 30% chance you're not surviving that year. That's crazy. Just because you took a fall and broke your hip after the age of 65, 3 out of 10 people are not going to live out that whole next year.
Yeah, that fall that breaks a hip, the hospitalization itself, that is going to accelerate your physical decline as well as your cognitive decline. And that's the moment someone loses confidence, right? They feel helpless in their body, and most often they never quite get it back. And it feels sudden, but it's not, right? It's this result of decades of under-preparing, and it's not their fault, because in medicine, you know, we're tracking blood pressure. We're not having these conversations about ensuring our bodies for the long run. And we've had decades of really tracking the wrong metrics, right?
I think that's the key point, that we have not been tracking correctly. Because we haven't been tracking correctly, we haven't been able to advise correctly. Part of it is cultural also. I think that we've accustomize the population to expect that most treatments are a pill and not like mental discipline on this is how I should actually be structuring my life. So
absolutely. That woman that you're referring to, she didn't need to be thinner. She needed to be stronger. And when I was growing up, I know this was in the 80s and 90s, and the emphasis was cardio and calorie restriction. Our generation lived through every bad diet. It was low fat diet. Then it was the South Beach diet, then low carb. We have literally survived everything. And I think all of these, if we've learned one thing, it's that these are fads. None of this is protecting us, right? Someone that follows a low fat diet is completely missing out, and they are not playing the long game. So I think it's a good lesson, and it's a realization for all of us that playing the long game is about balance, and it is one of those important shifts in how we think about aging.
Yeah, the quick fixes, they're seductive. They do actually typically make you look better in the short term, but what they're really promising doesn't come to fruition in the long run. You know, the pill, the protocol, the 21-day juice cleanse, the blood test that tells you what your biological age is. It's really not telling you whether you're winning this longer game. It's just giving you a snapshot right now and psychologically making you feel like you're doing something, but really in the long run, I don't think it's doing much at all. Your body is essentially a very skeptical investor. It's not going to make major changes based on one quarter of good performance. It really needs years of consistent returns before it believes that you're serious about your investment. And this is part of why that crash dieting, it doesn't work. It's sending a signal to your body of scarcity, and your body responds by slowing down metabolism, preserving fat. It literally is preparing you for famine. Our body is evolved for efficiency. So if you are depriving yourself from sleep, your body is getting the signal that there must be danger. That's why you're not sleeping. And your body responds by sending a bunch of inflammatory markers through your system and developing insulin resistance, because in the short term, that is adaptive for stress. It's not good for long term. And that's where I think people don't realize what they're doing when they're compromising on some of these fundamentals. Chronic stress sends a signal of threat, and your body stays in this survival mode, not in repair mode.
And I think it being beginning of the year, there's a lot of folks that want to start these crash diets. And here's some data on crash dieting specifically. Studies show that aggressive caloric restriction reduces your resting metabolic rate by 15 to 25%. And your resting metabolic rate is that metric of how many calories you're burning by doing absolutely nothing. And so by you extreme calorie restricting, you're lowering your metabolism, and that's actually backfiring for the long haul. And this can take years for your metabolism to recover from that 1 month crash diet, or it may not recover at all. So you're not failing the diet is failing you. And we want to emphasize all the stuff you see on Instagram, TikTok, buy this pill, buy this crash diet. Like, that's not how you win the long game.
I think muscle loss is the clearest example of why the crash diet thing seems to backfire. If you are aggressively restricting your calories in your 40s without adequate protein intake and without adequate resistance training, really what happens is, yes, you'll lose fat, but your body says muscle is very expensive for me to maintain, much more expensive than fat is to maintain. Let me get rid of muscle too. And when you start getting rid of muscle, you're lowering your metabolic rate. That's what you're referring to, that your resting metabolic rate declines. The reason why it takes such a long time to restore your resting metabolic rate is because you have to increase muscle mass. And if you lost 30% of your muscle, then your resting metabolic rate cannot recover to where it really should be until you replace that muscle again. So that's part of this kind of hard truth here, that you generally don't regain muscle as you age. And that's not just because, you don't want to regain it. It's because we develop this anabolic resistance as we get older. It takes more stimulus and more proper fueling for us to put on muscle as we age. A 20-year-old can go to the gym and not even pay attention to how they're eating, and they will put on muscle. As long as they're putting in enough effort, they will put on muscle because they don't have that anabolic resistance. But as we get older, we develop that, and we have to be much more thoughtful about how much protein we're taking in and how much effort we're putting in when we actually do go to the gym.
Yeah, we have to start thinking about muscle as our metabolic checking account, right? Muscle is the site for glucose disposal. It's where blood sugar goes after a meal. Less muscle means higher blood sugar, more insulin resistance, more fat storage, and more diabetes risk. And aside from the metabolic health portion, muscle is fall prevention. It's what catches you when you stumble. As you mentioned, those type 2 fast twitch muscle fibers, if we are not actively training for those fast compound movements, you are not going to be able to catch yourself when you fall in your 70. So muscle is metabolic health. It is the engine that keeps everything running. And muscle is synonymous with independence.
There's just no like supplement that replaces it. There's no injection. There's no shortcut. I often hear people ask me like, well, what are your thoughts on testosterone replacement and people taking growth hormone or testosterone analogs? My thought is that if you see somebody who looks like they're in really good shape, they have a lot of good muscle, and you ask them, are they on testosterone replacement? And they say yes. I will tell you that they still put in a ton of work to look like that. Just taking the testosterone shot does not make you have muscle. It doesn't work that way. So if they're using it as a tool, like we can have a debate about medical indications for those things, but any person who looks good, really looks good, they have a lot of lean muscle mass, they put in a lot of work. There is just no replacement for putting in the work to get that phenotype, to have that look. And those people generally are metabolically very healthy and protected from those things like falls and injuries. So every year someone tries to, sell some sort of pill, that mimics exercise, some sort of supplement. And every year, I think, those treatments quietly disappear and they're replaced by something new. Evolution spent millions of years fine-tuning the benefits of physical activity. And truly, there's no pharmacist, no black market pharmacist in China that's going to be able to replace that yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
All right, let's get into the curveball of life when life doesn't go as planned. And we've all been there, right? So we always have a plan, but then sometimes the plan doesn't happen. And this is a part of the long game that no one talks about. Sometimes you don't get to play the long game cleanly. And this happened to me. So this was 10 years ago. I was diagnosed with a rare blood cancer. I didn't plan for it. I didn't cause it. I didn't miss a supplement or fail a protocol. I ate pretty much correctly, worked out, and it still happened. It was a curveball, a huge one. And it was a kind of curveball that reshapes your life and changes everything. And suddenly the long game wasn't theoretical anymore, right? It was personal. I think a lot of people look at me and assume that I'm healthy. And the truth is I live with this blood cancer. I also have an autoimmune disease that affects the big joints in my body, my hip, my spine. I've got a ton of skeletons in my proverbial health closet, right? But my diagnosis is not my destiny. And I've learned that lifestyle largely dictates how quickly cancer progresses, how significant an autoimmune disease flares, which is why for people like me who already have an existing chronic condition, if any of you are listening, it's even more important to play the long game and focus on these things rather than the short term.
I think watching you or someone you love go through something like that, it really strips away a lot of the noise of life. I think at first, obviously, it was really tough and I felt helpless because on the surface level, there's like nothing I can do to really help, right? You start to transition how you're thinking about so many different things and you start asking some of these questions of like, well, how do we preserve what we have? Energy, strength, our cognition, clarity, just our ability to keep living really fully, even in the presence of this large uncertainty. And I think this was a real test for us in playing the long game and a huge catalyst for why we went down this longevity route after years of being in the traditional medical model. There had to be other things that factor into cancer and other diseases. And at least personally, I didn't want Nisha to be just this statistic, right? Like we're just playing the odds of what the oncologist says, like these are success rates and adverse reaction rates and whatnot. So we kind of leaned into the same sorts of concepts that we discuss on this podcast, right? it turns out that a really good VO2 max, high lean muscle mass, good metabolic health, these are huge stopgaps for the diseases, which is why Nisha and I are so locked in, as our kids would say, locked in to playing the long game.
Yeah, that diagnosis was a low point for us. I think our third was only 1 year old, so we had 3 kids under age 4. But over time, we made lemonade out of lemons and used that adversity to propel us in a completely new trajectory. And what I realized was I don't want to be known as a cancer patient. I'm not defined by my diagnosis. I have so much more to offer in life to my patients, you, our kids, loved ones, friends. And that bone marrow biopsy 10 years ago really changed the trajectory of our life. I also don't want my kids to have to take care of me. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want them rearranging their lives, their careers, their families, because I didn't do my part, the part that I actually had a hand in. And that's not the legacy I want to leave. And here's a sobering stat. The average family caregiver spends 24 hours per week providing care to loved ones. Over 60% of caregivers report significant emotional stress. 40% suffer from depression. When we don't invest in our own health, the bill gets paid by the people we love. And this isn't a guilt trip, right? It's physics. Someone has to absorb the cost of dependency. And there's something else. My disease might progress one day, right? I might need a stem cell transplant at one point. And that's a brutal procedure. The recovery is grueling. It's a 1-year process. And I made a conscious decision. If that day ever comes, I'm walking into that in the best damn shape of my life, right? Not because I can control the cancer. I can't, but I can control my fitness, my VO2 max, my muscle mass, my resilience. And I am giving myself, by training for those things, the best chance of fighting my disease. And I'm not just in namesake fighting cancer. I'm not like the survivor fighter. I'm fighting cancer through my day-to-day habits. I absolutely love my oncologist. She knows that. She's at University of Chicago. She does her part to keep me healthy with all the latest research in this bone marrow cancer that I have, but I have to do my part too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's super powerful, right? And that's the biggest take-home message that I think we want everyone to feel empowered with. Really, the data backs up what you're saying. Surgical outcomes and cancer outcomes are dramatically better in patients who have a higher VO2 max and just in general higher fitness levels. Studies show that patients with a higher cardiorespiratory fitness have a 50% lower mortality rate after major surgery. Prehabilitation, getting fit before a procedure, is one of the most powerful interventions in medicine. And most patients never even really hear about it. Like when I had shoulder surgery, I had basically full reconstructive surgery of my shoulder. Like my orthopedic surgeon didn't get it. He's like, you should not be able to do what you're doing 6 weeks out from surgery. And I was like, but I'm fine. And he's trying to slow me down, but functionally I felt just fine. But it was because I was functionally fine beforehand, and I had made it a point to stay in as good shape as I could leading up to the surgery. Modern medicine, I think, really is extraordinary. It can do things that we just would not have imagined possible even one generation ago, but it can't do the part that is ours to do, which are the things that we can actually control. And that's really the stakes of the long game. We've learned that life is far from perfect, and you aren't always dealt a fair hand or a good hand. But really, it's not about perfection of that hand. It's about preparing for that hand.
So here we are. If you're listening to this in January or February or whenever for that matter, maybe you came here to look for a resolution, a plan, a spark of motivation to get through until spring. We hope this gave you something different, a different mindset, something a little more sustainable?
I think motivation fades over time. Statistics really prove that. Remember, 80% of people are going to fail that New Year's resolution by February. But purpose compounds over time. And the purpose we're proposing is it's really not look better at the beach. It's be there for the moments that really matter, that would matter to you. And I think that's the big take home.
Yeah. We want to be at our grandkids' wedding. We want to be able to chase after them, right? And keep up with them. There's all these trips we have left to take. And you have to picture what you want your life to look like at 75, 80, 85 and beyond. That's worth more than any 30-day transformation or sales pitch.
So here's what we want you to take away. First, you have to think in decades, not days. Every health choice is a small deposit in an account that you're going to draw from later. Second, you have to prioritize muscle. It is truly the organ of longevity. You have to lift heavy things. You have to eat enough protein, and you have to repeat this over and over again. Doesn't matter if you miss one exercise day or you go off the rails and have overeat Christmas. Like, you should do those things because you can't be perfect every day. But then the day after, you gotta, reel it back in. Third, don't confuse thinness with fitness. I think the scale is just a terrible proxy for health, and it's not a way we just shouldn't be living and dying by what the number is on the scale. Fourth, we have to build a life that makes health sustainable for us. So if your routine really just requires suffering to maintain it, it's just not going to last. And that's partially why you need to start slow. Like, from my standpoint, if you don't exercising for 5 minutes a day where you just you do some air squats, you do some crunches, attempt a couple push-ups and do that all for 5 minutes, that's a start. That's something that can work. And then you can build off of that. If your idea is I need to go to the gym for 2 hours, 5 days a week, you're likely going to fail if that was not something that you're accustomed to doing.
Yeah, we have to be okay with starting where we are. We do not need to be perfect. You do not need to overhaul everything. As we said, longevity and health span optimization is not about deprivation. You just need to start. Start building consistently, patiently with your future self in mind. That's what playing the long game is.
And unlike New Year's resolution, it doesn't expire on February 1st, right? Purpose does not expire.
Thank you guys for listening to this episode. We will see you next time on Playing the Long Game.
Take care of yourselves. And as always, your 85-year-old self is counting on it. Take care. Happy New Year's. Thank you for playing the long game with MD Longevity Lab. You can visit us at www.mdlongevitylab.com to learn more about how we can support you on your journey. Stay connected with us on social media at MD Longevity Lab for tips, updates, and behind-the-scenes insights. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you subscribed, left us a rating, or shared it with someone you know who's also playing the long game. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.